Hi, video game movies used to be a joke. Like, legally, a joke. You say video game adaptation and people would immediately think of bad wigs, bad CGI, and directors who very clearly never touched a controller in their life. For decades, adapting video games to movies seemed impossible. Not difficult, impossible. The kind of impossible where Hollywood kept trying anyway and kept face planting every single time. And yeah, Uwe happened.
I'm the only genius in the whole business. Goodbye.
We'll talk about that nightmare later. But something changed. Suddenly, video game adaptations aren't just working. They are winning awards and breaking box office and viewership records. And now, everyone is asking the same question. Did Hollywood finally crack the code? But the more important question here is, are video games quietly becoming the future of cinema? But here's one thing no one really talks about. It doesn't start and end with Hollywood. Long before prestige TV, long before billion-dollar studios, there was Mirai Ninja in 1988. The real first video game adaptation that preceded the 1993 Super Mario Bros., proving that video game adaptations have more history than we think. Video games adaptations were being made around the world with widely different philosophies, budget, and levels of chaos. Some failed spectacularly, some misunderstood games completely, and some accidentally predicted where cinema was headed years before Hollywood caught up. So today, we are not just asking whether video game adaptations are the future of cinema. We are tracing how we got here globally and what had to break for it to finally start working. Let's go!
Sensei!
Here is the uncomfortable truth that Hollywood took way too long to understand. Video games never needed movies. Games were already doing things cinema couldn't. They were telling stories, but they were also simulating them. Player choice, failure as part of the narrative, emotional attachment built over dozens of hours, not just two. Cinema looked at video games and saw, oh cool, intellectual property. But what video games were systems. And that's where most adaptations went wrong from day one. Hollywood tried to adapt plots when the thing people loved was the experience. Movies are passive, games are participatory. Movies say, watch this character change. Games say, you are the character, now live with the consequences. The difference matters more than budget. It matters more than casting. It matters more than CGI. So why adapt games at all? Because studio executives saw a built-in audience, a recognizable brand, and a cross-medium domination. What they did not see was authorship. Early game adaptations were not made because someone loved the source material. They were made because someone owned the rights. Which explains why so many early adaptations feel like movies that accidentally wear a video game skin. But meanwhile, games were evolving without cinema. While Hollywood was busy misunderstanding games, games were quietly learning from movies. Camera language, editing rhythm, performance capture, cinematic framing. By the late 90s and early 2000s, games were already borrowing from film grammar, expanding narrative complexity, experimenting with tone and pacing. Cinema wasn't teaching games how to tell stories. Games were teaching themselves. And that imbalance would define decades of failed adaptations. To understand why early video game adaptations failed, you need to stop asking, why were these movies so bad? And start asking, could they ever have been good in the first place? Let's start with one everyone points to, Super Mario Bros. A movie so aggressively bizarre that it feels like a dare. This wasn't a misunderstanding of Mario, this was a philosophical disagreement. Nintendo had a colorful, abstract fantasy world. Hollywood said, okay, but what if Blade Runner with dinosaurs? And here's the thing, they didn't fail because they were unfaithful. They failed because they tried to justify a game that never needed the justification. That mistake was rectified recently, but we'll talk about that later. Then there is Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat. These movies taught Hollywood the wrong lessons. Street Fighter leaned into camp and spectacle, which meant the characters became costumes, not identities. What was sad about the live-action Street Fighter movie is that it already had a blueprint. Street Fighter II, the animated movie. The 1994 animated classic was extremely well received by fans and critics alike. It had everything you want in a Street Fighter movie. Great fights, amazing character designs, and above all, respect for the lore. It created hype and set the stage for the live-action adaptation. But, unfortunately, Hollywood learned nothing from its success, and the result was a complete disaster. One of the most memeable movies of all time. Mortal Kombat, on the other hand, accidentally did something smart. It respected tone over realism. It didn't try to explain itself. It said, here are the rules, accept them or leave. And audiences responded. It was a massive success in 1995 at the box office, grossing $122 million against a budget of $20 million. The first video game adaptation to turn profit. Too bad its sequel Mortal Kombat Annihilation completely destroyed its legacy by being one of the worst movies of all time.
It cannot be.
Oh, but it can. And you are powerless.
Mother, you're alive.
Too bad you will die.
Show them the way to oblivion!
But that's a conversation for another day. The lesson here should have been, tone matters more than fidelity. Hollywood heard, fight games make money. And then there's Uwe Ball.
Hell no, man. What the fuck, man?
I'm the only genius in the whole fucking business. Goodbye.
You cannot talk about European video game adaptations without starting and probably ending with Uwe Ball. The German director is infamous for his feverish obsession with turning video games, often critically panned and cult classics, into live-action movies that look like they were shot in a warehouse during a tornado warning. Ball's filmography includes adaptations of House of the Dead in 2003, Alone in the Dark and BloodRayne in 2005, and Postal in 2007, among others. Each film shares certain hallmarks: wooden acting, laughably bad dialogue, awkward fight choreography, and an inexplicable devotion to copying game plot points with little consideration for narrative flow or cinematic pacing. Ball wasn't the cause of the problem though, it was the symptom. His films were cynical misunderstandings. They were contractual obligations with a camera. But here is what matters. Ball exposed how little oversight and care studios had for game adaptations. These movies were not being made to succeed, they were being made to exist, and for a long time, that was enough. Side note, do you remember when Uwe Ball boxed his critics? Like, this guy literally invited the people who criticized his movie to a boxing match. I swear to God, I wish I was making this up.
All the hecklers, all the critics, all the geeks. If you come up here and you fight me, then I will kick the shit out of you.
His movies are bad, they're terrible, they're awful.
Most of his movies suck.
Uwe Ball. I've got no words. By the mid-2000s, the verdict was in. Video game movies were bad. Fans expected failure, critics rolled their eyes, and cinema moved on, confident that games simply did not translate. But while Hollywood wrote them off, something else was happening outside the mainstream, outside of Hollywood. in places that were not trying to fix video games, but adapt them on their own terms. If Hollywood's problem was embarrassment, Japan's approach was the opposite. Japanese adaptations did not ask, how can we make this respectable? They asked, how can we make this feel like the games? And sometimes that worked. Sometimes it absolutely did not. But it was always honest. In Japan, video games were not treated like low art invading cinema. There were already animation, manga, merch, TV, music, and so on. Adapting a game wasn't crossing mediums. It was continuing a conversation, which is why so many adaptations lean towards anime OVAs, stylized live action, direct visual translation. Fidelity wasn't a constraint, it was the point. Take the OVA boom of the late 80s and 90s. By the way, if you're not familiar with the term OVA, it stands for Original Video Animation, referring to anime released directly to home video like VHS, DVD, or Blu-ray instead of TV or theaters. These were not prestige productions. They were short, weird, and hyper-specific. But here's what they did right. They did not retell the game. They expanded it. Alternate perspectives, world-building experiments. The assumption was, you already played the game. Let's give you something extra. That mindset alone puts these adaptations decades ahead of Hollywood. But total faithfulness has a ceiling. Because games designed around mechanics, grinding, repetition, progression don't always translate into drama. Which is why many Japanese live-action adaptations feel stiff, over-explained, and sometimes structurally strange. They respected the surface of games, but struggled with their rhythm. Turns out, watching someone level up for 2 hours isn't absolute cinema. On the other hand, Europe's relationship with video game adaptations is odd. These were not passion projects. They were not prestige plays. They were, we have the rights, let's do something with them. But that distance created something fascinating. Many European adaptations were not made for fans, which meant no reverence, no obligation, no fear of backlash. The results were movies that felt like genre films first, video game movies second. Sometimes that meant incoherence, sometimes it meant accidental freedom. I mean, look at Uwe Boll. Boll dominated the space because of minimal creative oversight. But strip away the memes and you see something important. These films reveal that adaptation without understanding is worse than adaptation with obsession. They were not offensive because they were inaccurate. They were offensive because they were empty. Most of these movies failed, commercially, critically, culturally. But failure matters because each tested one theory. How literal is too literal? How much can you change? Who is the audience? Hollywood didn't ask this question seriously until much later. When you step back and look at global adaptations together, a pattern becomes obvious. The adaptations that failed hardest chased legitimacy, feared stylization, treated games like broken movies. The ones that almost worked, respected tone, understood audience, didn't apologize for being games. None of them cracked the code completely, but together they mapped the problem. By the late 2000s, the industry had learned something important. Even if they hadn't realized it yet, video games are not unadaptable. They were being adapted by the wrong people, for the wrong reasons, the wrong way. And then, control started to shift. Before we talk about success, let's briefly talk about the major failures that pushed the industry to rethink everything. Like Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time in 2010. On paper, this should have worked. big budget, Jerry Bruckheimer producing a game already inspired by cinema, a story literally built around time manipulation, and yet it landed with a shrug. And I know the whitewashing controversy had something to do with its failure, but that's not the biggest problem in this case. The problem is that it was not a disaster, it was not a hit, just forgotten. Prince of Persia did not fail because it disrespected the game. It failed because it treated the game as a storyboard, not a system. The rewind mechanic, the entire emotional core of the game, became a visual gimmick instead of a narrative principle. Then Assassin's Creed was released in 2016 and just decided to repeat the cycle. Another forgotten, dull and lifeless trash. Another movie that managed to turn a fun game into a boring movie. This was the last time Hollywood could say, we did everything wrong, because they did. But despite good efforts from Japan with their release of Tekken Blood Vengeance in 2011 and the solid adaptation of Ace Attorney in 2012, the real turning point didn't happen in theaters. It happened on television, specifically on Netflix. Castlevania in 2017, Arcane in 2021. Two adaptations, two widely different games, one shared realization. Castlevania wasn't prestige because it looked expensive. It was prestige because it understood tone. Gothic melodrama, operatic violence, characters allowed to be theatrical and broken. And most importantly, it didn't adapt a single game. It adapted a lineage. It pulled from Castlevania 3, Dracula's Curse, Symphony of the Night, and decades of iconography. This wasn't translation. It was just curation. Then Arcane changed the conversation completely. Based on League of Legends, a game with almost no traditional narrative, Riot didn't hand over the IP and walk away. They co-authored it. Years of development, custom animation pipeline, direct creative oversight, and suddenly people were saying something unheard of. You don't need to play the game. Arcane proved that fidelity is optional. Emotional truth is not. Games can be foundational, not restrictive. Television gave adaptations time, but cinema still needed its breakthrough. That came with Detective Pikachu in 2019 and then Sonic the Hedgehog in 2020. Detective Pikachu should not work. It's a live-action Pokemon noir comedy, and yet it works because it does something radical. It adapts the world, not the brand. Pokemon exist in ecosystems. People live with them. The rules are baked into the setting. The film treats the game logic as environmental storytelling. That's not fan service. That's understanding the medium. Sonic the Hedgehog, on the other hand, matters for a very specific reason. The studio released the initial look. The fans rejected it because, well, it looked like shit. And the backlash worked. When fans rejected the original design, the studio listened. That moment redefined the power dynamic. For the first time, audience familiarity mattered more than executive confidence. The redesign wasn't just cosmetic. It symbolized a shift towards respect, dialogue, but also accountability. Then came The Last of Us on HBO in 2023, and the debate ended. This wasn't just a good adaptation, it was prestige television, period. And yes, season 1 was brilliant, I don't care what you say. Neil Druckmann didn't consult, he co-created. The show didn't retell the game beat for beat. Episodes like Long Time expanded moments the game only implied. Others stripped mechanics entirely. And it worked because the adaptation understood what to preserve and what to abandon. By the early 2020s, the industry had finally learned the lesson. Video game adaptations succeed when creators are involved, time is respected, systems are translated into themes, tone comes before plot. But get this, for all the history, false starts and creative dead ends, the real reason studios are suddenly obsessed with video game adaptations is simple. They finally started working. Like, genuinely. The Super Mario Bros. Movie in 2023 came out, and not only did it succeed, it crossed a psychological threshold. Over $1 billion worldwide for a film that didn't chase prestige, didn't apologize for being a game, and didn't try to fix its source material. It leaned into iconography and familiarity. It understood that Mario doesn't need realism or emotional trauma. It needs momentum and color and joy. And guess what? Fans and general audiences ate it up. And in 2025, a Minecraft movie did something even stranger. It proved that a game with no traditional narrative could still become a global blockbuster. Not by inventing complexity, but by translating the experience of the game into cinematic spectacle. These were not adaptations trying to be cinema first and games second. They were games that trusted cinema as a delivery system. But the same era also proves that success isn't automatic. Even now, a movie like Uncharted proved it. It just showed how easy it is to miss the point while technically checking all the boxes. It had the name, the set pieces, the globe-trotting adventure, and yet it felt like a greatest hits playlist stripped of tension and personality. Its biggest crime, in my opinion, wasn't disrespect, it was dilution. Yeah, it kind of matched the tone of the game, but it never matched its personality. Not with the characters, and certainly not with tension, as the movie mostly feels bland. But also, you have Mortal Kombat in 2021. That film clearly wanted to do right by the fans. It respected the law, embraced the violence, and foregrounded the tournament mythos. But it still stumbled by introducing a placeholder protagonist, flattening its pacing, and mistaking fidelity for drama. Which is the key lesson of this current moment. Good faith isn't enough. The future of video game adaptations won't be decided by whether studios respect the source material. It will be decided by whether they understand what kind of experience the game actually offers, and how to translate that into a medium that demands rhythm and makes choices without player input. But this raises the final question. If adaptations are finally working, is it because video games changed? Or is it because cinema did? And more importantly, does it mean that video game adaptations are the future of cinema, or just its next phase? The internet loves framing this as a numbers game. Box office, viewership, awards. Finally, we cracked it! But are video game adaptations the future of cinema is actually the wrong question. Because adaptations are not trying to replace cinema. They are just exposing its weaknesses. Hollywood didn't fall in love with video games. Hollywood ran out of certainty. Mid-budget films vanished. Original IP became a risk. Franchises became life rafts. Video games offer built-in audiences, deep worlds, and emotional investment measured in hours. But here's the twist. The adaptations that succeed don't behave like IP exploitation. They behave like author-driven television, art-forward animation, genre film with clear identity. Games didn't save cinema. Creators did. Video games forced cinema to relearn something it forgot. That words matter just as much as plots. That characters don't need constant explanation. They need space to exist. That audience intelligence isn't a threat. Modern adaptations succeed because they trust silence, let environments tell stories, treat emotion as cumulative, not instantaneous. That's not a game lesson. That's a storytelling one. But let's be clear, not every video game deserves an adaptation, and not every adaptation deserves prestige. Games built entirely around mechanics like Tetris, Pac-Man, or Call of Duty require invention, not translation. And when invention disappears, you get hollow content. The danger isn't too many adaptations. The danger is confusing recognition with meaning. The future of cinema isn't video games, it's media literacy. Creators who understand why games work, why films work, and where they should or should not overlap. Today, we've got a sequel to the Super Mario Bros. Movie coming up, a new Street Fighter movie that looks bonkers, a sequel to the 2021 Mortal Kombat movie, a Legend of Zelda movie, and probably dozens of other adaptations we haven't heard about yet. They won't all be good, that's impossible, but that's besides the point. They just need to not repeat the mistakes of the past. The best adaptations don't feel like games turned into movies. They feel like stories that could only exist after the games. So, are video game adaptations really the future of cinema? Not necessarily, but they are the clearest proof that cinema is finally willing to change. For decades, movies tried to dominate games. Now they are listening. And that might be the most cinematic development of all. And if the next era of cinema is being shaped by people who grew up holding controllers instead of film textbooks, honestly, about time.
Goodbye.